Before we get started, I want to make a big announcement. The audiobook version of Don't Be a Jerk and other practical advice from Dogen, Japan's greatest Zen master, my latest piece of literary trash, is now available from audible.com. I'll put the link down below, but all you got to do if you don't get the link or if you're looking at this on some other platform is go to audible.com, type in Don't Be a Jerk. I don't think there's any other books with that title. It'll come right up and you can order yours, and please do, because I actually make more money from audiobooks than I do from my written books, so I'm very happy when people order these things. Plus, I read it myself, and my friend John Graves mastered it and fixed some of the problems with it, and there's a special theme song, just like Gilligan's Island, at the beginning of the book, so you can enjoy that. I'm going to start off with something I just found. I was trying to find a particular quote from Dogen, and what I used to do when I was studying with Nishijima Roshi was that I would write things in the back of books. When he would say something or when I would think of something, I would just kind of jot it down in the back of the book, often with a page number, so I could remember where the page we were looking at was. So I was looking for one of those, and I found this thing I wrote. You were born from emptiness, and now that emptiness is trying to figure out how to be you. There was never any you to begin with. Nothingness is attempting to be somethingness, and you are the result. That isn't Dogen, that's just me. A little brain fart from Brad. This week I put up a blog about obsession in Zazen. I received an email from a friend of mine that said this. He said, "I am mostly stressed. Cancer stress, work stress, news stress, etc. This is why I can't do Zazen. Sitting still means obsessing about all the things I can't deal with or focusing on all the stuff I need to do." His wife is going through chemotherapy, and that's why there's a bit about cancer stress. And when I read this, I thought about the time when my mother was dying, and I was going through a divorce, my grandmother was dying, and I was losing my job. All those things were happening all at the same time, and I wrote about them in a little book called Zen Wrapped in Karma Dipped in Chocolate. At any rate, when all of that was going on, that's what Zazen was like for me. Stress and thinking about what I should have said, thinking about what I should not have said, thinking about what I ought to do, thinking about what I ought not to do, trying to anticipate what was going to happen next, trying to anticipate what other people were thinking. All of that was just rolling around in my head. I'd been doing Zazen for a number of years by then, so I wasn't exactly an amateur. I had some idea that this was the process. This idea that you can't do Zazen because there are too many distractions is probably one of my biggest FAQs. It's right up there along the lines of, am I doing this wrong? My first teacher, Tim McCarthy, used to say that if you were having a problem, the best thing to do was to sit with it. When I first heard this advice, I thought it was crazy, because when you have a problem and you try to sit, all you're going to think about is the problem. It's not going to be a fun sitting. But what I came to realize after a while was that the fun meditations, the ones that feel good, the ones that feel sort of like, oh, everything is beautiful, those are nice. And you can kind of wish for those times and hope for them. But I don't think those are the times when you get the most benefit out of the practice. You get more benefit out of your practice of meditation when you are sitting in a disturbed, difficult situation. It's the same as you get more out of exercise when you're jogging up the hill than you do if you're jogging down the hill. Jogging down the hill feels wonderful. Jogging up the hill feels terrible. But you're actually working your muscles more. It's the same sort of thing with Zazen. So when you're sitting and having these problems, this is a chance, an opportunity for you to go deeply into what the problems really are. And when I say going deeply into what the problems really are, I don't mean going into the details of the problems. This is one of the mistakes we make. We have a difficult time, and we're given a chance, or we have an opportunity to be quiet with it, and we sit there trying to figure it out, thinking of all the details and all the little shapes and whatnot, trying to figure it out. This works for some things, conventional problems, engineering problems, mathematical problems, these kind of things. Uh, if you sit and think them through, sometimes you can come up with a solution. More personal, existential type problems don't really respond very well to that. The problem of overthinking, the problem of obsessing, definitely does not respond well to that kind of approach, because you're just producing more obsession in your quest to undo obsession. What happened to me when I would sit with these very deep problems was that it began to feel like a piece of gum out of which all of the flavor had been chewed. And I'm still chewing it. After a while, if you stop trying to focus on getting more flavor out of this gum that's completely lost its flavor, you can start to notice the actual act of chewing, what you're doing with it. This is where the analogy starts to break down. You can't exactly take your problems and wad them up in a piece of paper and throw them away. It's more difficult than that. But you can notice that you are constantly poking and prodding at your own mind to get more juice out of it. So what I did when I was doing this, I was noticing that I have a habit, and I think we all have this habit, of every time the mind becomes a little quiet, we get a little scared, I think. Maybe not everybody reacts exactly with what they would define as fear, but there's this little nagging insistence that you've got to think about something. Especially if the problem seems important. You've got to poke it to get it to give something more back to you. And this is a habit of thought that I think we all develop. This is especially true in the age of the internet. You've got so much access to so many people going on and on about so many problems that you can feel like if you don't constantly address these things, you don't care. The other day I was shooting a movie with Piruz, my friend Piruz, who makes these little weird indie movies and casts me in them all the time. And as we were shooting, the guy who was the director of photography had his iPhone out, and he's constantly scrolling through, you know, looking at Twitter, looking at Facebook, getting more and more information. He's a pretty astute, politically aware sort of guy. He didn't really tell us what he was looking at, but I'm sure he was looking at political information and personal information and all sorts of stuff. This is what we do. We're constantly exposed to and bombarded by this stuff. But the fact is, we don't really need that much information. After a while, the information becomes a kind of overload. And I believe, I don't have any medical facts to prove this or back this up, or surveys, because I don't think they're actually been done. I don't think people have gotten that far with it. But I think there's this finite amount of stuff your brain can work with. And once you reach capacity, you're just adding on to it nothing that's usable. It's like it's the same thing we do with food. Now that we have food available everywhere, we eat too much and we become fat. We eat more than the energy output of our body can handle, and you get fat. The same thing happens to your mind. Too much is going on. So how do you break this habit? That is easier said than done. There's a quote by Dogen, which is the one I was looking for when I found the one I told you about that I'd written in the back of the book. And it goes this: intellectual excluding now adds to the disease and augments the disease. The very moment itself of eliminating is inevitably disturbance. They are simultaneous and beyond simultaneousness. Disturbances always include the fact of trying to eliminate them. This is from an essay of his called Kuge, which means flowers in space, which is like pigs in space, only with flowers. And if you want to find the Nishijima translation, it appears in Book 3 of Shobo Genzo, the yellowish one. This particular passage was very important to me in my practice because when I saw it, I realized, oh, that's true. The fact of trying to eliminate a disturbance actually makes more disturbance. So you don't get rid of unwanted thoughts by either thinking the opposite thing or trying to stop thinking. It won't work. When you try to stop thinking, that just adds another layer of trying to do something in your mind, and it gives the mind more stuff to work with. It doesn't help the situation. After years of trial and error and experimentation and talking to teachers and reading books and whatnot, it finally occurred to me that the most obvious answer is the one that my teachers all told me right at the beginning of my study, which is when disturbing thoughts come up, don't try to do anything with them. Don't try to stop them. Don't try to think the opposite thing. Don't try to logically disprove something your mind is already believing. None of that works. Let them go. Now, that's easier said than done, but in each moment, as the thought comes up, just try not holding on to it. What you'll do with a thought usually is a thought comes up and it's like a conversation. So the thought comes up and then the other thought comes up in response to that, and it comes and it builds on it like that. Stop that. Again, easier said than done. But in the moment that you find yourself doing that, just don't do it. It'll take a long time before a new sort of habit develops, but if you work with it, it can develop. I think the fear that a lot of us have is that if we do this, then it means we don't care anymore. If we don't think about every last tweet that Donald Trump has tweeted today, if we don't read every last Facebook page about this or that injustice or who's saying what or this person did the other thing and so on and so forth, then we don't care. But that's nonsense. It's nonsense that a lot of us believe very sincerely, but it's still nonsense. Just not constantly churning up the stuff in your head doesn't mean you don't care about it. It means at this moment, I'm not going to churn it up in my head. What happens if you do that after a while is you realize that you care just as much as you ever did about whatever it was. You care just as deeply, only you are not constantly churning it in your head. This means that when a time arrives that you can do something about that thing, you are able to do it without distraction, maybe not completely without distraction, but without nearly as much distraction as you had before. And that makes you more effective at actually doing something about the problem. And all I can say is don't use I'm too disturbed or there's too much going on as an excuse not to practice. It's a very easy excuse to make. It's a very attractive excuse because you know going into it, if you're having a lot of stuff going on in your head, that the Zazen experience this time, tonight, or this morning, whatever it is not going to be pleasant. So it's easy to want to avoid something that you know isn't pleasant. But my advice is do it anyway. Go in and put in your 10 minutes, your 20 minutes, your 30 minutes, 40 minutes, however long you've decided to do, and do it. Even when things are churning up in your head like crazy. Because you will find that there are times when you can't really do anything about the specific problem. When I think back to the divorce, there were times when I and my now ex-wife had talked about everything we could talk about. And any more talking was just going to cause more upset. So what do you do then? You have to stop talking. It doesn't mean you're stopping talking forever, but there's no point in talking tonight. So you go in and you do your zazen instead. And this feels terrible, but it actually helps you learn much better what to do when these thoughts come up. Eventually, you start developing new habits, and these new habits take over for the old one. The downside is you're not quite as fiery and passionate. Doesn't mean you don't want to do anything. See, this is something artistic types get worried about. They think if they do meditation, they're going to lose their passion for creating art. Well, I've been doing meditation for 35 odd years, and I've written 6 books, and another one is coming out this year. It hasn't dulled my creative urges. In fact, it's made them sharper, if anything. But that kind of like, I'm gonna do it sort of thing that we often confuse with passion is largely not there anymore. And I'm thankful for that because it didn't really help in the creation of anything. It didn't help in my interpersonal relationships. It didn't help with anything. It just made me feel like shit. So, bottom line is when you feel like Zazen is going to be shitty, do it anyway. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great day.